Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy that you're still here. This morning rather, we talked about this climate issues, security, and now the third major issue of the future. This means digitalization. And Birgit, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction. We've got a wonderful panel here. Let me start here on the left. That is on the right from your point of view, Gerhard Wagner. He's got a faculty for civic right, economic right, and economics of the Humboldt University at the Berlin University. He's an expert in everything in the context of digitalization and, of course, the legal aspects. In the middle, Herbert Reitzwanger. He is the CEO of the University Clinic for Ophthalmology and Optometrics in Salzburg. So he is a medical expert. And on the very right, we've got Matthias Risse. He is the rights officer for human rights issues and human rights policies at the university. So we've got the legal, we've got the medical and the philosophical experts, United States, Austria, and we've got Germany. So I believe we have a very, very good panel here. Let me start with one of the questions which Birke asked us, meaning, do we really have to regulate, and what is it we have to regulate? To what extent have we regulated in order to come up with a world which is open and sustainable? Well, I can say simply, we need not regulate. You see, I find it a bit unfortunate, you see, if you talk about digitalization, it's always a triad. Climate change, Ukraine, war, digitalization. So there's always the triad of war, so to speak. Now, what I want to say is, I think we should talk about the opportunities and chances digitalization offers. And we, the Europeans, have really good reason to do so, because we are not, say, in a very good position in this respect, and I believe we could need some more progress with these technologies. Well, you might say, okay, this is uncontested, that's something which we need, but there are risks. And surely we have to address these risks. Now, in principle, that's right, because like each and every new technology, it offers chances, offers risks. Now, the question is, shall we really, address all these issues in terms of regulations, introducing regulations? And here I recommend something which we had 170 years ago when railways were introduced in Prussia at the time. The Prussian state, came up with a railway law, and the only thing that was written in there was liability. You say, if there is damage and accident, then the operator of the railway system has to take on responsibility. And of course, people thought of injuries or sparks. These were steam engines at the time. So this is a law stemming from the largest legal expert, Friedrich Karl von Savigny. And I think the basic idea today, also when talking about digitalization, the basic idea is correct. Let it go, let it run, let the development go. Use the chances in this or of this technology, and if there's any damage or injuries, then of course, then the manufacturers, the providers have to take on responsibility. Is that naive? No, I don't think it is. The EU has come up with the right response in the last, say, legislation period. They talked about the product liability issues and reformed these regulations in such a way that it applies to all software applications. And the manufacturers of these or developers of these products have to take on the responsibility, take on the liability for these, say, damages or losses or damages. So maybe it is necessary to fine-tune things here or there in one or the other region. But I can say we haven't gone so far. We do not know what are the damages, what are, say, the injuries which might happen, what are the real risks. Now, reading these 400 pages of the AI Act, I feel confirmed, because there is really very, very little tangible that you can read in there. Well, of course, Article 5, these are the exceptions. These refer to, say, law enforcement in the various member states, and for that you don't need any, say, comprehensive AI regulation. So you need data assessment and evaluation and forbid, I don't know, application, this or that. Apart from that, I say let things go, watch, monitor, seize opportunities, and if there are any, say, damages which liability or liability laws cannot handle, then yeah, you still have a chance to rectify things. That's wonderful. We start with, say, some applause. AI Act, I'm sure that every one of you is interested in that because this is completely new legislation which we'll see in the future. But now the perspective of the philosopher. Well, you see, my brief message is regulate. Do so. Definitely do so. But your three, say, initial thoughts. Who is we? I'm not really, I'm not really a fan of what the EU is doing, but you also have to see all the response and things in this context do not happen in the EU. It's got nothing to do with the fact that there aren't any, say, smart minds there. No, it is all about, the EU finding it very difficult to scale up things, to make things really big. That's what happens in the United States. Use it as venture capitalism culture. So if something interesting happens there, then they all look at it, scale up things. So this is why we have these massive models in, the American IT companies. They need so much infrastructure that they, cannot run these things alone, and even universities cannot run it alone. They use that. So this is what happens in the United States. And of course, the interest in regulating things, that's something which is very low in the United States. And another aspect is also very important. Now here, the speed, this increasing speed of this development, the acceleration. We've got digital computers. Well, we've had them since the 1930s or 40s. AI was detected in a document in 1950. There was a summer school in Daphnis College, and they thought they would be able to handle everything within one summer, map everything and have it reflected. Then in 1965 there was another step, so things slowed down over the following years. But I can say because of conceptual breakthroughs, because of huge data quantities, because of new developments of chips, we've made a lot of progress. Things have really accelerated. And I do not want to make it complicated. There's a wonderful document which you should really read. Leopold Aschenbrenner said situational awareness. This is a document everyone should read. It's probably one of the best you can use your time today. Read this Leopold Aschenbrenner's book. He shows the trends, and that you should see that all this is not a linear development. You see, these are non-linear trends over the last, 5 months, 5 years, 10 years. It will continue like this, and there's lots and lots and lots that supports each other. It is about creating AI. You're an engineer of AI. How can you use it? You see, AI is writing itself, and all the feedbacks which we have. And this is one of the reasons, and I'm not just saying it like this. I believe it's a very, very serious position. In this discussion, there is and there will be a general artificial intelligence this decade. I do not say it simply like that, but this is something what we really have to be aware of, and it will become a reality. And then another preliminary remark also, and this is something which was addressed by somebody else. If you ask people, those manufacturing these things, the engineers, you see, they, maybe there are people. You can ask anyone, but I ask the developers, how do you see the risks? And they say that this might lead to an extinction of us or mankind. And the opinion is 6%. 6% is the percentage. It doesn't sound dramatic, but think of Boeing. Boeing has got lots and lots of doors, bolts and screws. They all lost that recently. But just imagine that the heads of Boeing have to stand up and say, okay, we're going to get things under control. But nevertheless, at present, you have to accept that 6% of our planes are crashing. So nobody would get on a plane. But this is the reality when you're talking about AI. It will be built, and we rely on a group of people, and they say there's a 6% probability of this AI extinguishing us. Matthias, just a supplemental question here. You really said how great AI is, how much is developing, how much is going on there. Now, your Boeing example. Now, let's say Boeing says you could die if you get on this plane. Now, this is what I understand, but this is really an abstract figure, isn't it? 6%. Now, what does this figure tell me? Now, how can I get from 6% is what the 6% meaning extinction of mankind, and then the idea how this can happen, just to get an idea of how I can regulate things or what I can regulate in this respect. I believe the brief version is, or answer is, this is too much for us these days. Lots and lots of things are happening. Too much, actually. We, mankind, are not in a position to process all the information, all the developments going on right now. So I think we should continue our research laboratories, surely more research, this is bacteria, viruses, and why shouldn't this be possible for AI, and all this then having positive consequences? You see, I want to say it's too much for us. We are not, we do not have a clean slate in this respect. We can say, and people producing all this are really, really nervous, but then nevertheless they are working on this because it's all about solving problems. So you might say, okay, that's nice and well, but nevertheless we will leave it up to some, I don't know, private companies when we are going to do that, when we're going to publish or regulate this or that. So it's not easy. I believe here we've got some kind of, narcissistic humiliation of mankind, or Darwinian turning point, meaning we are no longer in control, but maybe this... Okay, anyway. All right, now what I would like to know, what about the medical practice? It will play a role there, doesn't it yet? Doesn't it already? Well, Freud would really be very, very happy about AI. You just touch on that. You see, it is like you said. Lots of things are happening. In 2013, in Salzburg, we have used AI. We've got very good databases, and it can come up with diagnostics. If you look ahead 10 years, 15 years, then, I can say everything is done in a very controlled manner, and you need not be concerned. You need not be afraid. You know the data records. You know the data sets. So easy. But the problem is, what will happen if the data records, they become very diverse, taking about content, so to speak. Let's assume, just assume, the data records are well constructed, designed, will be easily addressable, plenty of good data models backing them up, and of course AI can develop some properties and characteristics which are not foreseeable, predictable. So you cannot look into that, and an algorithm open it and say, okay, this is how it works, and we are going to replicate this. Well, people tried that. Responsible AI, this was the approach. But at the end of the day, it will be very, very difficult. Where can we start when it comes to regulations? And another example, in medicine, there are, appliances which are being sold. Many manufacturers selling these appliances, what they have in common is that they are not supposed to give false positive diagnosis. You got cancer, and the machine says, no, you haven't got cancer. Then, of course, not a good situation. This means we've got this Gaussian curve of, say, fallibility or failability must be shifted in such a way that you do not come up with false negative statements. And, false positive also something. Now, in a health system, this might lead to enormous costs. It's, this applies to a coronavirus test and also, for everything actually. And I believe this has not been taken into account, regulated. What is the damage to our health system if an AI system, causes some problems? This has not been regulated yet. Well, I know. We always tend to regulate things, maybe too much so. And here you mentioned railway, but if I'm waiting for a German train, waiting at the station in Salzburg, this train doesn't arrive. But anyway, and I thought, lots of things are regulated in Austria, and until my friend in Bavaria came up, with the contrary idea, and then I changed my view. What I want to say is we do not have a starting point. We do not know what and where to regulate, and then we start at a very high level. And by doing so, we are going to prevent other things. Very interesting, I should say. And this brings me to Gerhard. Liability. Maybe we can, find out or work out what is AI. This is just part of the digitalization world. AI is a kind of black box within things are happening of which we do not know what will come out. And I believe that's a specific problem. I know that this is a very much layman's, say, definition, but just assume it's like this. We've got a box, data fed in, and it will then generate a decision based on these data. So there might be solutions, there might be results of which the user does not know that this will be the result. So what I want to say is, okay, I can continue things along these lines. If you look at modern AI systems, then this AI has got the possibility to change itself. It will also change decision-making criteria. This is, in a simple system, you've got a criterion, you've got a stochastic process, and something will come out which you cannot control. And this is, this is when it comes to any predictions. But let us take things a step further. Then decision-making criteria might be changed by such a system. And then the situation, of course, is a bit different, because then you will really not know what the system can do, because it might be able to do much, much, much more, say, different things. But the criteria necessary to handle this or that task or assignment, that's good, but it might lead to some output which is certainly not desired. Then, friendly AI. Moralistic ideas, values, which will such an AI will implement it and will also make sure that this is kind of pursued or observed in practice, in reality. But there was a forecast made that everything will work out. That nothing will work out along these lines. Things will fail. I think, I think all this development will take place, and of course you can close down the factory. All this happens in a virtual space, in a bodiless space. So you cannot say it's like a bakery. This is the place where the rolls are being baked or the cakes are being baked. No, it's different. AIs has to be designed and built up in such a way which will, say, protect us against such damage. Friendly AIs is the catchword here. Okay, Jürgen Hecker gave us a question. This is the E-person. My question to Gerhard, will the E-person be around? Now, just against the backdrop of the difficulties, meaning it can make autonomous decisions. Well, the European Parliament thought about it. That was a resolution several years ago. And I can say it really draw attention. It sounds really good. But I believe, or at least for the time being, it is certainly not a good idea. Just imagine it to be like this. You've got, the damages to be paid, and if you address the respective issues to a computer system, you have to reimburse. Then, of course, this computer doesn't have any monies. And, this would mean that we've got an externalization of risks, so to speak. And those who really are suggesting this, they've come to that point as well. They thought about it, and then they said, okay, we have to require some kind of minimum capital funds which must be made available, or insurance obligations which from your car. You're not allowed to drive a car without having entered into, say, a liability insurance contract. So maybe that's one of the minimum requirements we should introduce. But then the question is, who is going to pay for these insurance premiums? And the answer is, well, either the manufacturer or the user. Now, if you then want to take a decision in this respect, then of course the question is, now why do I need an e-person in the first place? Because if the manufacturer has to take on responsibility and liability because they have to insure that person, then of course I can, have recourse to this person directly without, through an e-person. And then you might ask, what will an e-person change? The answer might be it offers you some kind of liability protection because, if the insured sum is, say, exhausted, then the manufacturer will no longer take a responsibility for any excess amounts. And then, of course, you might ask even more so why do we need something like this? I think we've got our own liability identity and the actors, the players behind it, in capital companies, the shareholders, that is, an e-person, in this case, manufacturers, users, protect them against any, say, kind of liabilities. Then, of course, this would certainly be an instrument to externalize things. And this, here I agree with you for that. There is no reason whatsoever, when it comes to technologies which are new and you can't, say, judge its risks, then you might say, okay, up to a certain threshold, up to a certain insured sum, up till then liability will be assumed. So sometimes you might say this is not a good idea. And like it happened in the past, the responsibility of the manufacturer or the liability of the manufacturer, this is the only player who can kind of say respond or influence the behavior of such a system, at least to some extent, because they are programming it. I believe they should take on this. Just a brief comment on this. Because I believe things have gone much further. An e-person, the digital twin, is something similar, isn't it? You see, at present, we are shifting, say, research from biology to the virtual. You see, we have got drug development, simulations, and this means we are going to have twins of people having the same properties and characteristics of real persons, and then you test the drugs in a virtual space, and then you start developing these drugs. Let's say 50% of the side effects of a drug, you don't know these side effects when the drug is being launched into the market. And look at our AI. Will people? This is what they do. Will people go to see a doctor? Will they go to a pharmacy or to a chemist? Whatever. This is something which we cannot necessarily say. But what I want to say is this is a kind of AI. It's kind of a drug which has not been tested, say, in terms of clinical studies or something like this. So in this case, working out any causalities, then, or if we reach this point, then I should say things are really, really complicated, and it's very difficult to define who is responsible or to be blamed for this or that. Now, from a philosophical approach or view, can say machines can be embedded in the legal understanding of persons. But then we might also ask, how close are we to what we the philosophers consider a person? And this is a question I'd like to ask you, everyone listening, who believe that that machines can have a soul, can have a conscience. Who believes that? Who believes that? Something that is actually not possible. Having an awareness, having a soul. Who believes that? So obviously, it looks like that the majority does not believe it. I should say, I think nothing that we know of this favors a yes in this respect. So there's such a high level of not knowing things. Let me put it like this. You see, the philosophy of spirits, the mental phenomena are being thought of, awareness, say, spirit and soul, etc., etc., putting everything. These are non-material phenomena. So philosophy of the spirit, there are certain ideas, and there are two forthcoming position is materialism. So this is not materialism, meaning I want to get much, but materialism meaning there is matter. There is just one thing in this world, and spiritual phenomena are like things which just come out of the real things. So this is the idea and attitude we have, or opinions we have about the world. So matter, materials, the awareness. And all this, the awareness will come out of the matter, but, to put it simply, you could reduce everything down to, say, matter. But if this is how the world is, that there's only matter, so then you do not have any separate phenomena, and then, everything that is not organic might not become something. Sorry. There is another point. Dualism. There are two different things in this world: main awareness, soul, and all these things. They're all separate. Many believe, those who buy a soul are dualist, but then you have a problem of trying to get things together. But again, it's a case. Not everything that we know. You see, machines of this complexity, we don't know them yet. And this tells us if there are two different types of things, then of course these non-organic, non-carbon-based entity, which might have an awareness sooner or later, or if you start thinking about God, so far God, didn't think of iPhones or other similar things, but nevertheless, nothing that we know from the history, from philosophy or theory, tells us that God might not come up with a highly complicated computer. We do not know anything. And of course, we do not know whether God is watching us or not. Well, anyway, I just know that philosophy cannot answer this question. So, and of course, there are different aspects which have to be handled. Of course, we could go on for hours and hours discussing these issues, but nevertheless, I think I want to throw open the floor. Prepare your questions. And now I would like to tell you what the AI Act contains, which is of the 13th of June. It will be in effect on the 2nd of August 2026, and maybe some parts already in February. It's the regulation of high-risk AI systems. Now, what systems are they? Just to give you an idea. These are systems using biometrics, systems which are referring to the system critical infrastructure. What we've seen last week, systems which interfere with education systems, evaluations, assessments of universities, of schools, things which have to do with staff or HR management. This means hiring and the career letter, systems which are being used in law enforcement situations, migration, asylum. All these systems can use AI, and all these systems are considered to be a special system which the EU believes have to be regulated. But obviously not everyone knows what these systems are. You see, a regulation consists of the fact that there are many obligations, many duties, management, documentation duties. So this is actually the level where we are on right now, and it's the big question: are we on the right track, a right way, in order to bring about a good digital future?
Just a brief comment. I agree with everything, but if we assume that in the first and second world, we see the manifestation of awareness only have a high degree of complexity of neurons, then, of course, there is no contradiction there, and that this is something that can happen electronically, no question. But if we assume that that is the case, then we are moving in this direction full speed ahead. Things are becoming much more complex, and quantum computing will be able to analyze things in an enormous way. So we will be able to see a microprocessor and a quantum computer. This has the performance of all the microprocessors worldwide, just to get an idea of what this means. Now, you don't need to tell me that these will not be able to develop an awareness. It's no contradiction with religion or your belief in God. Well, I commented and I assumed that the E person is a pragmatic figure. just like a company, and nobody said that the company has a soul. Well, I like to say there was a Goethe who was close to saying that, but I think we all agree that these are pragmatic subjects in order to achieve economic goals efficiently. And the EU Parliament referred to this when they talked about the E person. That's what they were talking about. And in order to achieve certain liabilities. But now, if you were to say, we're going to have an analogy to human beings, then of course I think that there are two major questions. Number one, is there something like a claim as to how a person can be recognized as a human being? Do we have to, if we produce an artifact which has certain features, then we can only say that we can see that there is a certain rights. I don't really believe in that, but this is something that you might accept. But if not, we could decide pragmatically whether we want this or not. The second question is, if there is such a claim, what criteria would then be applied? And this question of material spirit, but that's only one criterion, because there are whole lists of things which would characterize humans as opposed to objects in nature and non-living objects. And here, feelings, the ability to have feelings, to feel pain. This plays a very important role. It has nothing to do with spirit. It's a question of suffering in animals. So if a thing cannot feel pain, then you have to ask yourself, why should we have or generate moral obligations and considerations? That's why I'd be very reluctant here. But, well, how do you want to know that they can't do this? Well, I think we have to give the floor to the audience. Now it's time for your question. Let's begin at the back. My name is Sebastian Mutalet, and I am at Matese in Austria. And we had a conference on autonomous arms systems. More than 40 companies attended. They're talking about automatic self-controlled weapons that can take off and do whatever they want. There are two things I learned there. Nothing is regulated there. So the question is, does this need to be regulated? And the second question is, and this is also something that's related to security, representatives from the Global South were very upset about this topic because they said that all of the algorithms that can control AI are white men from Central Europe or North America. Everything else is something that is used against ethnics. Do we really need to use AI in these types of weapons systems? I think that should go to our weapons expert. In human rights expert, sorry. The first point is that this is something that has been called for a long time by the human rights organizations, that weapons systems which are possible, technically speaking, that you don't need to control them. That's one of these phenomena where we can say that you're just waiting for someone to develop this and say then they should go ahead and do so. These need to be controlled, but I think that this is a demand that we would consider. But the second thing that you mentioned, and this is extremely important, you can see this everywhere. You see the bias questions in IT. In other words, the data where something happens, and this is usually data from white people, usually white men, white males, and this leads to consequences in medicine, in safety analyses, and in the United States, this is something that is recognized as a phenomenon, and we have a lot of ideas on this, and this is, I'm glad that you brought this point up because it's very up to date. It's recognized globally, basically. I see Mr. Wellinghoff. I'm going to use my natural intelligence to take as many of questions in the extra time we've been given. Thank you very much. I am also concerned with AI, and I'd just like to add that military question is something that is excluded from AI, from the AI Act. Everything under the sun has been regulated. But the thing that I would like to ask, does it make sense to regulate the way the EU does? They have a regulation of 460 pages. The scope is basically coordinated with the data protection law, but it's hardly possible to understand it. And there is a lot of information, a lot of documentation, etc., all of these other requirements. And then with the AI Act, we also talk about the definition of AI, which has changed 3 times. So the question is, are there any other regulatory approaches, the Council of Europe or other countries outside of the EU? Isn't this something that is makes much more sense? And I think it would go against all of the possibilities of regulation and the documentation, reporting, and understandability, etc. And this is without the user considering everything that's there on the table can be understood by the user of these. That's exactly the point I was trying to make. If you want specific safety, if we had specific safety regulations, this is the way it needs to be, fine. If you're familiar with that, I don't think we do though, however, that's why we have not ruled any, then that would be okay. But then it wouldn't be 460 pages long. Instead, we have this huge amount of paper, and it's a question of costs. It's cost a lot because if a manufacturer develops risky software and has to carry out risk management, they knew that beforehand. We don't need AI. We don't need an AI Act for that. This can be seen from all of the other product safety regulations in the EU or the product liability regulations. So I would say that the EU, when it comes to, they've really done something with regard to innovation without generating any benefits. If there were great benefits, then of course we want to avoid the damage. Then of course we have to have a smaller amount of innovation or less quick innovation. This is a consideration that you could come up with, and you could argue with respect to how great the risks and how great the opportunities are. But now we really don't know what the risks are. They're not even mentioned. You just have a huge amount of procedural, informational, documentational requirements. These will lead to lots of costs, but they are not, there is no benefit as from all of this. And this is seen in this way elsewhere as well. In the United States, the American Law Institution, they have sort of they're thinking about a type of soft law for regulation. I'll take one more question, and the other ones will have to wait until some other time. I see someone in the back. Sorry, in the middle. Dennis Krab here from Munich. I am reading a book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and here it's all about the negative impact on the mental health of the young people. And this is a relatively young phenomenon. It's been something he's been working on for 15 or 20 years. This group of people, and they will see much more of the impact of the AI than those of us here in this room today. So I think maybe they might even need more regulation than what we have today, and everything that we did not carry out when it comes to the phone-based generation. And also, and I'm a father now, I have 3 teenage boys, and this is something that I go through every day. So how do you see that when it comes to the younger generation and AI, where of course these phenomena that we see as a problem today with regard to education, and that these will get even worse? Let me ask the doctor. Well, I also have 3 terrorists at home, and during COVID it was unreal. But I wouldn't say that it's so much a question of AI. It's also a question of increased consumption of electronic media. We've had some clear statements on that. For example, in 2050, the most frequent cause of blindness will be short-sightedness. Short-sightedness is because working here, and maybe less here, but even more in Asia, we know that orthopedic damage is due to the posture, and We also know that psychological problems, if you move away from society and have no interaction with others, and you use this is even more so with AI, and this is also even more separated from others because you get more confirmation. So I would say I'm not an expert here, but I can just tell you that the physical impacts are huge. And one statement to conclude, are we moving towards a fair, just, and sustainable digital world? Well, yes, we are, if we consider slowly along this path. Eo Wilson also said that we live with Stone Age genes, medieval institutions, and 21st century technology. It's a bit exaggerated, but that's the situation we're in. So if we have a Stone Age genes and we now have to get by and continue with the 21st century technology so that we can be in a free, just, and sustainable world. I see this in positive terms because I think that we are going to be reasonable enough to take the necessary measures before we are made extinct by AI. You can only beat your opponent in chess, for example, if you know the opponent better. And that's the way I see things. I hope that we will develop in this direction. That's how I see it. I see things positively. Nobody will be surprised by that. I can just remind everyone here, 2006, that was when the iPhone had its real breakthrough on the market. And you might ask yourself, what kind of benefits have we gotten from this little device? If you just think about going to a city you're not familiar with and you want to take public transportation to get from A to B, in the past, this would have been something that would be a research program for a complete afternoon to figure out how to get there. And today it's just a question of maybe 2 minutes tops. So I think that there are huge opportunities. Of course, there are risks. We have to deal with these risks. There will be setbacks. And of course, there will be failures like we had with this cloud strike thing last week. But let's be honest with ourselves. It was not that much of a disaster. Some people didn't take off in their planes. It was something that people regretted. I would have been upset if I'd been on that plane, but in the grand scheme of things, it's only a minor detail. So I would then say that the positive effects outweigh the negative ones. Thank you very much to everyone on the panel and to those of you in the audience.